Alright guys, so I put together a wee Blade Runner style video and thought I'd talk a wee bit about it. This isn't really a step-by-step guide or anything like that, it's just a bit of a breakdown of how I decided to do it, and hopefully you'll find some of the ideas useful or just interesting in general. I'm not really a visual effects artist, this is just basic 2D compositing and miniature photography with live action elements, so there's no CGI or anything like that in this. So all the props I used for the shoot were just the sand, the car, the statues, the jacket, and the blaster. All of these I found on Amazon, all of these were fairly cheap, and they all did the job pretty well. The sand was quite fine grain, I had to get quite fine grain sand, otherwise when you start to scale things as you shoot miniatures, you start to notice that each chunk of sand starts to look like a small rock, so I made sure that the sand was very, very fine grain. The car I used was quite detailed. It looked very good on camera, surprisingly so, for how cheap it was. The statues were just generic ornaments. They looked fairly good though, they looked like the statues from the film. I was very pleased with them. Jacket was a sort of cheap looking and feeling Blade Runner jacket, but it did the job well. So the blaster's pretty cool. It was actually 3D printed. It was very lightweight, but it was a good size. It was about the size of what you'd imagine the real one would be, about the size of just a regular pistol. It did feel fragile, but it did the job very well. So to shoot the miniatures, I shot on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K. I like this camera quite a bit, I think it's very easy to use, and its dual native ISO proved very useful for the shoot for reasons I'll get into. I shot on a 9mm wide-angle fisheye lens. I didn't want to shoot on any telephoto lenses as they contract the distances between objects, making the space look very small, whereas if I shoot on a wide-angle lens, it expands the distances between objects, making the space look a lot larger. So the problem I got with shooting a wide-angle lens though is when you bring all your objects very close to the camera, the depth of field becomes very, very narrow, and this is a huge giveaway that you're looking at miniatures, so I had to raise my f-stop. This does basically fix the problem, but you're suddenly letting a lot less light into your sensor, so you've either got to pump the scene full of light or raise your ISO, and because the Blackmagic's got a dual native ISO, it was able to do that quite well. So I lit the scene with 4 LED panels. There were multiple setups for different shots, but mostly it was quite simple, just the lights bouncing from the ceiling. So this gave a very soft top-down light, which is very natural of such a foggy environment, as all the particles in the air are just going to scatter that light around, so there's no obvious shadows or anything like that. So for a lot of the shots where there were objects in the frame moving, I shot in slow motion. This is important to give objects a sense of scale, as when you're shooting miniatures, they have a much shorter distance to travel than their larger counterpart, so they do need to take more time, and the best way to do that is to shoot it in slow motion. This also helped for some of the tracking shots where you might see a tiny bit of jitter in the camera since you are shooting at such small scales, and it just helps to smooth that out a wee bit. So it's no surprise that the shots with myself in it were all shot on a green screen. Most of the green screen shots are just at my house, whilst others are in a location my friend had access to. Those shots in another location were simply just to put distance between me and the camera for some of the wider shots. It is important that when you shoot a green screen element, you shoot it at the correct perspective you intend to composite it. If you just shoot an object up close and make it smaller in post, it won't look right. You do have to shoot your subject far away if you want it to be far away in the final composite. So again, for the scene I used the LED panels. I made sure the green screen was lit nice and evenly. I bounced light from the ceiling to give that nice soft top-down light coming on top of me. That's just to make sure that it matches with the miniature footage and with the environment I'm going to be placed in. So once I shot my different elements, it was time to composite them together. I used both After Effects and Premiere to do this, depending on the shot. Obviously there was a lot of keying going on for the green screen, but I did have to rotoscope quite a few shots, as obviously my feet would sometimes be outside of the green screen and there were no green screens for the miniature stuff, so all of the elements there had to be rotoscoped. I was able to take advantage of a rotoscoping AI called Runway ML. This is an editing software and browser which has lots of different AI technologies, one of which allows you to do some rotoscoping. It worked very well for all the car shots. I believe every single shot of the miniature car was rotoscoped by the AI. For the fog, I either used a fog texture and colored it appropriately, or I just used solid colors right in Premiere or After Effects. It is important that you use multiple solid colors to give it some variety and make it look more natural. One thing to note about the compositing is it was made quite a bit easier, because even though it wasn't black and white, it was somewhat monochromatic. There weren't many colors going on. There were just the oranges and the yellows. This did make everything blend together quite nicely. Also, there's just fog everywhere, and this makes it so easy to hide the seams and make things look quite a bit more natural and a bit more polished when they might not really be that polished. So that's that. That's just a very basic breakdown of how I decided to do a wee Blade Runner effect. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you found it useful, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.